Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Raising the Bar with myself, John Cooper, and today I'm really happy and delighted to have Posie Parker on the show. How are you doing in the Neon studio?
I'm great, thank you. It's day one of the school holidays, so woohoo!
Woo. So this is obviously quite an important topic. We've been talking about this subject for the last few episodes now. We had on Walt Heyer, who talked about his transition and his detransition. But I would really like to hear your story, and especially how it got you to the point where you're now campaigning for what should be pretty obvious in terms of like women's rights, in terms of establishing a woman is a woman. So would it be okay if we could just hear your journey, your backstory, and what led you up to this point, Posie?
Yeah, sure. So I was a regular stay-at-home mother, whatever that entails. Apparently not as much housework as people imagine. But the Tories were elected, and I was sort of a paid-up member of the Labour Party at that point, and the Tories were elected. So I joined this group, online women's group of awesome lefty women. And then, like, the women were, I mean, as ineffective as all online women's groups are, to be very fair. And women just talked about what potential strategies we would have moving forward. Like, we would be counsellors and we would do whatever to try and stop whatever ruin the Tories were going to bring. And it was, women didn't really often talk about their family situation. Sometimes you didn't know if somebody was married, if they had kids, if they were a lesbian, didn't know anything. And then these men started joining, older men in their sort of late 50s. And what they did is share sort of boudoir photo shoots of themselves in women's clothes. And everyone started sort of weirdly applauding and fawning over these men in a way that I'm pretty sure if I put some photo shoot kind of shots up, I don't think I would have got this quite the same adulation. But it was really interesting. And one guy joined with...
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear you. Could you please repeat?
No, I couldn't. I don't even know why it's done. I'm so... How unprofessional is that? I'll go back to the beginning of my...
It's all right. I thought someone was putting in an objection there already.
I was thinking, what is that? So these men started joining with soft focus kind of boudoir photo shoots. And one specific man joined, and already there was talk of identifying as a woman, which was a term I hadn't really heard before. I'd heard of transvestite and transsexual, but identifying as a woman or is a trans woman. And I just said to this guy who started with a Northern comic social work, working men's club. And it was sort of, what do you get if you find a woman tied to a radiator or something? It was some sort of male violence, not very funny joke. And I just said to that person, are you sure you identify as a woman? Well, I may as well have said, can I come and kill your family and your whole village? Because the way he responded was insane. But the way that other women responded to me, even daring to ask that question, made me think there really is quite a lot to talk about here. So that was my journey into what we call peak trans.
Yeah, I mean, so what happened at that point? Did you then just completely abandon it, the group, or was there infighting at that point, or what actually happened?
Well, there was infighting. There was a lot of, if you don't think we should exploit women's bodies for sex and allow vulnerable women to go into prostitution, then you're evil. But also you're a transphobe, you're a bigot, you're a TERF if you don't think women have penises. And so I sort of stayed and fought my corner for a little bit. You know, at first probably tentatively using language, and then thinking this is really bad. I'm actually being told that I have to think that that person is a woman when every fibre in my body tells me they're not. And then I just then went into other Labour groups, which I was in many Labour groups, and asked the question, does my 11-year-old daughter have the right to go in a female-only space and not see an adult penis? And I'm sure you're anticipating the answer to that is, of course she does. She has every right not to feel unsafe in a space. But no, it was, you're a bigot, you're teaching your daughter to stare at people's genitals, what sort of pervert are you? Why are you raising a transphobe? And these were sometimes in women-only lefty groups. And so that my journey began, and I just started talking about it on Twitter until I got banned. and sort of in secret Facebook groups. But they're not even safe anymore, because you just have to use certain words in a certain order, and you can also your whole group can be zapped.
And that happened to you, didn't it, with the Twitter scandal where you were called up in front of a police officer? Well, you got a text first, didn't you, or something ridiculous like that, calling you in?
I did. So I'm in this group, and I said, and I'd been at the House of Commons, which was a talk organised by Venice Allen, and I'd been and talked at the House of Commons. I know that was and I'd mentioned some guy. That must have been after. But I mentioned some bloke anyway, and I tweeted about Susie Green. So I tweeted about the group called Mermaids, and they were going to pride marches and giving out like free ice lollies, and I just said something about the child catcher, and I said that transing children was abuse. And then that was in about September, and in February I started getting these texts saying I'd been reported to the police and they wanted to interview me. And I just thought, the police don't text. They don't text people to say they want to interview them. So I just ignored it, and this persisted. And then I got this missed call, and I remember driving down my driveway, and I was nearly at the road, and I just pulled over, and I said, I've just missed a call from here. And he was like this friendly, cheeky chap from Yorkshire. And he said that Susie Green, the CEO of Mermaids, had reported me for hate crimes, hate speech, a variety of other things. They really wanted to talk to me. Would I go to Leeds? And I said, no, I won't come to Leeds.
Yeah, of course.
And so the day before my son's birthday, I went to the police station where I live, and they'd sent 2 police officers to spend a night in a hotel to interview me. I don't know why that is. I don't know. I mean, it wasn't like there was going to be something material in front of them that another police officer couldn't have actually asked. They had the text in front of them, but I did hire a very, very posh older lawyer who came with me, who had to read out the statement that I'd prepared. And it was great hearing a very, he was so posh that he could get halfway through a sentence and pause for a long, uncomfortable time, and nobody would speak because they were just waiting for him to finish the sentence.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
put the shits up them with that level of poshness. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just great. And they said to me at one point, because I just did no comment, I'm very cool, I must say. I just channeled my years of watching a variety of American police dramas, and I just was like, no comment, and just sort of steely stared them in the eyes and just kept saying it. And then it becomes a preposterous thing to say because you keep repeating the same thing, right? So you keep going no comment, and then no comment sort of morphs into something else. It doesn't sound like no comment anymore. And then at one point they said to me, oh, you're really hateful. Do you like being hateful, or words to the effect, and said, sex reassignment surgery, you said it includes castration. Well, it doesn't. I just thought, what do you think? What do you think happens when somebody goes and tries to turn their penis and testicles into a vagina that never works, never heals, never looks right, is just a monstrous surgery? What do you think happens with their testicles? Do you think somehow they are not castrated, that they sort of keep them, they reattach them somewhere? What a ridiculous, just a really stupid person to say such a silly question. But yeah, that was my first interview, and then about a year later I was interviewed again for 2 comments on YouTube. And
there was no further prosecution, though, was there? It got thrown out for being ridiculous, I'm guessing. I'm hoping, anyway.
Well, there was no evidence. But the bizarre thing was, a journalist knew about it before I did, so I didn't get informed. And then the guy phoned me and he said, "Oh, great news! Great news! We're not going to take it any further." Or the Crown Prosecution Service. I said, "There's no case to answer," or something. And he said, "That's great news, isn't it?" And I said, "Well, no, not really." I said, "Because you've totally wasted my time. And I'd rather go into a court and actually say in a court that this is preposterous, and for it to be recorded as some sort of precedent that you can't intimidate women like this." But it wasn't to be. And so Susie Green reported me again about a year later.
And wasn't that one also about the 16-year-old kid that went to Thailand and got mutilated, castrated there? Was that the second time round?
No, that was the first one.
Oh, that was
the first one.
Yeah,
that was because I used the word castrated as well. But she took her son for his 16th birthday. I think mine got a PlayStation, but she took her son.
I shouldn't laugh because it's awful. It's evil what's going on, but like it's just ridiculous.
It's awful, but if you don't laugh, right?
Yeah, if you don't laugh, you're gonna have to cry. Yeah.
Well, look, my view on this particular one. So she took her son to Thailand, and her story is, and I've done a video on this, and it's Susie Green does a TED talk. So she is the CEO of Mermaids. She is one of, I think her son is probably the youngest, if not the only boy in the United Kingdom to actually have his genitals removed at age 16. And she did a documentary at the time where she sort of jokes that he didn't have enough genetic material to properly invert because he'd been on puberty blockers. So all of his genitals had stopped growing at about the age of 12 when he started these puberty blockers. And so therefore, not only will he have not had material, but he wouldn't have had enough sort of puberty and sexual development to actually have any pleasure receptors or sexual function of any nature. Now, that doesn't mean I don't know that boys' parts work very early on, if not at birth. But obviously the sexual, there's a reason that teenagers are sex crazed, and that's because they go through puberty, and puberty kind of switches it on all on for you. And he didn't get to do that. So she jokes about this genetic material. And then
why was he sorry to interject, Posie, but why was he on puberty blockers in the first place? Had he expressed a gender identity that was, different to his biological one, and then his mother sort of pushed him into it, or how did he even get to that stage?
Well, this is my view, and this is Susie in her own words, really, and I apologize if I misquote, but her words are available in her TED talk. And she talks about she sort of bumps all over the place. It's not quite consistent, but I'm sure she has a consistent story. So when he was 3 or 4, he liked loads of girl toys, shall we call them? So he liked Polly Pocket. And his dad basically went absolutely mad one day and said, no boy of mine, no son of mine is playing with girl toys. And they all got hidden or thrown away. And so this little boy, I don't know if you have kids, but if you tell a child that their favorite things ever, which will be the most important things for them, are not for them because they're a boy, why wouldn't they want to be a girl? And so from that moment, he then comes up with, well, this is my amateur psychologist, but if I'm a girl, then I get to play with Polly Pocket. So therefore I'm going to say I'm a girl. And so his dad, who was possibly deeply homophobic, maybe the pair of them were, she'd already decided that because he wanted to play with certain other toys that he might be gay. And that's what happened to him. And then it sticks, doesn't it? Then they've got a messy divorce going on. But look, I'm married to the absolute love of my life. But if he did something that cruel to one of our children, I wouldn't have been married for much longer, really. And I think she did this. Look, we all make mistakes as parents. And I think she did this and went along with this. And it became maybe far too much of a focus for her. But she did this out of compassion and love for her son. I don't think she did it to give him a really difficult life. However, she's never going to be able to admit to herself that it was the wrong thing to do, because you can't undo that. You can't undo that damage for him. So I do kind of understand her position. I just wish she would have kept it to her family. I wish it never happened he now goes by the name of Jackie. I wish it never happened to him. But just because it did, I don't think that gives her the right to promote it to other families and children and tell the lie that is that you can be born in the wrong body.
Yeah, it's shocking, isn't it? And what really upsets me is that they seem to jumble all together the difference between gender expression and sex. It's all the same thing to them. It's all the same thing. So like someone can be, well, we used to call it a tomboy. If a girl was like more manly, we would say they're more more of a tomboy. So you say that's like like a manliness to them. And then if a boy was more feminine, you'd say they were effeminate. But now it's just like, no, you're a woman now. No, you're a man now. It's like they're confusing gender expression with your actual gender, like your actual physical biology. And is that deliberate, or is that because they lack the kind of thinking, the logical thinking, to be able to have the discernment to categorize the different sort of expressions of gender? Or, I mean, what is it more of an evil agenda behind all this, do you think?
I think it's so many things. First of all, I have to say that I find talk of gender expression and all that, I find it's just quite unhelpful. I mean, if I have makeup on like this and I dye my hair and I'm very feminine in the way I dress, do people then assume that I'm sort of some sort of wallflower and subservient to my husband? I mean, I think we've just got to lose this. This is a personality that I've got, that I then decide to express it like this. But so this whole idea that gender is separate from sex, on the one hand, when I listen to people like on the right, like Ben Shapiro, who makes no separation, I think, well, in a funny sort of way, that makes more sense. That actually biological sex does have some way of shaping us, because even boys born in really patriarchal households will still have something that is not nurture. And gender, for most people, gender is some sort of idea that we are born and we can just have this stuff just nurtured into us. And I don't think that is helpful either. For them linking gender, sex, and on all that stuff, all I think is, if I then suddenly thought I was a boy and I'm saying it's my gender, so it's the way I want to express myself, why am I going to get a double mastectomy? Why do I need to change my biological sexed body to suit my whatever I think my gender is? And so I think this layer of stuff, sometimes you just think a woman is a woman, a man is a man, and we can have convoluted conversations about it where we try and get to the heart of it, but really it just makes sense as it is.
But they would say that there's a non-binary spectrum. I mean, I don't understand even the concept of a spectrum that's non-binary, because you have to have a pole at either end to even create a spectrum. But if they were to create this spectrum, then I think you've mentioned this in the past, where I think it was Mermaids organisation were going into schools and getting jelly babies out and showing them where are you on this spectrum.
Yeah.
Do you have any more to say on that one? Yeah, I know.
Well, I think I've just launched a petition to try and get lottery funding being given to these organisations, because they go into school, they train staff, they misrepresent the Equality Act and talk about the Equality Act being something that enables a boy who says he's a girl to use girls' spaces and changing rooms and toilets. But to tell a child, I mean, the psychological harm of saying to a child that, a little girl, if you really love cars, which I loved cars, I still love cars. If you say to a little girl who likes cars, well, you must be a boy, you're probably quite boyish, you're non-binary. I mean, how harmful is that? It's quite an evil thing to say to a child, that actually the body you're in doesn't suit your, brain, soul, gender, which apparently is somewhere that we can't quite find. So, you know, it's just not very helpful. And I think these kids actually just need some music. I think they just they need to wait for an album to come out, and then they have to go and queue in a shop and stand next to loads of other people who like the same music, so they can find a cultural sort of connection with that, as opposed to, I always say, it used to be that you had to do something to be someone, and now you don't really have to do much to have the currency of plenty of attention.
Yeah, and it's very strange that you can't buy alcohol before the age of 18, or in America 21. Yet you can cut you can cut your boobs off if you're transitioning, or you can mutilate yourself without almost any real procedure of care. It just seems as though I'm quite boyish. Oh, you're quite boyish. Oh, would you like to be you probably are a boy. Would you like the operation? I mean, how is it that we've got to the stage where this is being passed through so quickly without any you know, due care of attention?
I think if every single country had our health system, which had limited and finite resources, I think it probably would be easier to fight. But when you've got America, where Lupron, for example, is a puberty blocker, and it used to be used for men with prostate cancer. So it sort of blocks your hormones. And so it would stop the growth of cancer in the prostate. And what they found with Lupron is there were loads of doctors getting kickbacks to the tune of like 1.6 million in a year to prescribe it to patients who didn't actually need it, wouldn't benefit from it. So if you're like a 75-year-old man, you get prostate cancer, it might be so slow growing that actually you die with it as opposed to die of it. So eventually when you die at whatever your natural age would be, say 85, then you may die with your prostate cancer having not actually got you. Whereas what was happening with these men is they were dying of heart failure as a side effect of the drug. And then it also happened in Haiti, where women were given puberty blockers. Down in Australia, women used to be given or forced into puberty to stop being too tall, because that was obviously really not very feminine to have tall women. So we've often interfered with that sort of stuff. But in America, puberty blocker market is huge. I hope I'm not exaggerating when I say it's about 800 million. And so you've got people making such a lot of money that maybe they don't really want to look and see if it's an okay thing to do, because it's a money maker. There's a doctor in America, a blonde woman who's from Ireland, who has started euphemistically calling breast amputation. She started calling it yeet the teat, and she's got like a hashtag, and she does loads of TikTok videos with cool music about how great it is to have your breast cut off.
Oh,
and she's
God.
directly marketing to teenage girls.
This is disgusting.
Gross.
It's just unbelievable. I mean, I don't even know where to start with all that. I mean, do you think that's the most evil thing you've seen? And also, I was going to ask, also leading on to the campaign, I really want to get that in there as well. At what point did the campaign start?
So, you know, women are quite bad at activism. So I got roundly attacked by a large lefty women's group. And so I thought, well, I still want to do something, and we've got to tell people. So my campaign has always been about telling the people that have no idea what's going on, because I know they'll agree with me. You know, even if they feel compassion and I'm going to say pity for people that think they're born in the wrong body, and nobody wants other humans to suffer, whatever their root of sufferance is. Nobody wants to see that. But most women also don't want men in their spaces, and most women know what we called old school transvestites. We don't want them in our spaces. We don't want men in our spaces, and we read men as men. And so that was the purpose. And I was like, well, should I get a page of advertising in the Times? And that was like 40 grand. I was like, well, maybe not. Maybe I won't do that. And so I thought about a billboard, because they're very, very cheap. You can get a billboard for 700 quid, a paper billboard in somewhere not very great. And I knew the trans activists would go nuts. And so we thought about, eventually I came up with the dictionary definition of woman, just because you can't disagree with that, right? Even though now it is a transphobic dog whistle. Although, to be fair, this says adult human female on it, so that is an actual.
There we go. On your shop. Let's give it a plug.
I love this so much. I'm so happy with myself. So what I did is I put, it was the Labour Party conference, and it was Liverpool, where the mayor, Joe Anderson, I think he's been arrested recently. He was being absolutely vile to women in his chambers, and calling women transphobic and saying that they were trans inclusive, which is always weird for a bloke who's a blokey bloke who's never cared about women's issues, suddenly really cares about trans women's issues. It is just a new layer of misogyny in a way that I think some men can really attack women. So I put this billboard up, and it says, like the flag behind me, woman, and then the phonetic woman, noun, adult human female. And nothing happened. And I thought, oh, they're not going to complain. And then they complained so much. I don't think it was that many people, and they took it down. And it said that they'd wished they'd read the artwork because it should have raised a red flag, that it was problematic.
So it just got ripped down. They got the council to rip it down.
No, it was Prime Site, which is one of the largest outdoor sort of advertising companies in the world. So I knew I was beginning to really understand what Germaine Greer said when she said women have no idea how much men hate us, until, you know, and then coming across this where we're not even allowed to have our own definition. So I was beginning to sort of really see that. And I'm a woman. I've experienced sexism since I had breasts. I mean, that's just how it goes for women. Whether it's something mild, like someone just looking at your breast when they talk to you instead of you, or whether it's older men thinking they can catcall me when I'm like in my early teens. But, you know, not anything that would stop me going about my daily life, because I'm quite a feisty human, but certainly enough that sometimes you're like, you have to do the checklist of, if I tell that man to F off, who won't leave me alone, is he going to get really aggressive? If I tell that group of 3 men who keep asking me what my name is, and I tell them my name, are they then going to think that I'm actually opening more of a conversation with them? So women just have this constantly. What often happens is if someone asks me my name and I say I'm Mrs. Minshall, they do just back off, because then I'm somebody else's property. So I really can be left alone.
I'll have to use that one myself.
Sure, it works for men.
But it's not, but hang on a minute. It's not all, the thing is that I have this issue with feminism, the feminist sort of rhetoric, is that it makes it sound as though all men are like that and all men go out, they meet in a little room and they find ways to oppress women. And that's not the case, is it? I mean,
no.
Some men do this, but it's always a minority of men. And it's also, it isn't just the group men, it's also, they might be part of like 1,000 different groups as well, you know?
Yeah, although I would say the experience I've had in what we talk in 30 odd years now, it is men, and it's enough men for it to be, for me to have a healthy understanding that if I'm, the last time I traveled on a train, a guy came and sat next to me and just would not leave me alone. Now, in that carriage, 3 men sat on another table, looked at me and was like, and so there was always great men around. I'm married to one. I gave birth to 3. I'm fully aware that there are wonderful men around. And when I say men, I just mean they're not women, right? So when I can't say people, I do have to describe what the people are that do that. And it's just frequent enough for me to think it's an issue. And even my lovely friends talked about women in such a disgusting way. And these are really nice blokes, lovely blokes. Anyway, we digress.
Yes. Good point, though.
We digress. So I put the billboard up. Prime Site is this huge company. And so for the first time, I realized it was really serious. So the first time I sort of held my breath a little bit when they took it down, because I realized a large kind of faceless commercial entity thought it was more, it was better business sense to remove it than keep it up. And I think once you get into the cold, hard cash of business and they buckle like that, then I think we know we're in quite a lot of trouble.
And so was there, I mean, obviously you got a lot of media attention from there. It was a lot of a backlash, and I've seen a few of your interviews, debates, you know, from TV and stuff like that. Was that a huge explosion in your own personal ventures, you know, personal life? Or did you always have that kind of recognition as well? Because I kind of know you from that, but I don't know whether you're kind of known as in that way in the public arena or not. Or was that something that just completely propelled you into the limelight?
Yeah, it did. I think they arrested first of all. So not the arrest, or the interview under caution. So because I was one of the first, if not the first woman to be interviewed under this sort of, you can't even say that it's child abuse, or you can't say that a man is a woman. That sort of brought me some notoriety. I'm no shrinking violet anyway, and I do look like this. And so it's not like I really blend into the background. But yeah, the being on TV and really not capitulating at all. I'm not bending my language in any way, shape or form for anyone at any point. I'm just not going to do it. I mean, if say you'd invited me today and there was a guest that was a man who called himself a woman, I would just, rather than repeatedly offend him, I just wouldn't use pronouns, or I'd use they, but I'm certainly not saying she.
Yeah, I got that. You said that to India Willoughby as well, didn't you? Yeah, and it makes, you're very straight talking. That's why I like you. You're straight down the middle. You know, you're very upfront. I think that's what resonated with me and a lot of people. And it's just logical. It's just, for me, it's just common sense. But unfortunately, the world we're in right now doesn't really reflect that, does it? And can I ask then, what is the biggest issue that you have with it? Is it the fact that it's a safety issue for women, or is it the fact that it's an invasion of women's spaces, which is kind of, interlinked anyway? Or is there something else? Is there a deeper issue that you have with the whole transgender, movement, or whatever you want to call it?
It's so multifaceted. I think part of it is the gaslighting. So really the compulsion that women, compulsion, is that the word? Yeah, that women have to lie. And that so many women do it, that really upsets me. But of course the safety, I know you did the not all men thing, but as a female, because of these experiences, even if there are 1 million amazing men, if there's 100,000, which I would say was probably the proportion of men that I've met, well, actually that's completely not true. It just might feel like that. But I know that I feel differently with a man in my space, and it doesn't change if he calls himself Janet, and it doesn't change if he's had a lot of surgery, because I can still, even the way somebody walks, and I think women see it more than men, maybe because we have to recognize biological sex a bit easier. Maybe it's because we're not quite so sort of, and I mean shallow in a not offensive kind of, oh, you're so frivolous and shallow, you terrible men. But I just think the signals and the way our brain works, we just recognize biological sex a bit easier. Maybe it's because we're more empathic. Maybe it's because our brains are wired a little bit differently, because we are the sex that has and nurtures children. I'm sure there's evolutionary biological reasons why we do that, but we do. And also men are more of a threat to us than women are to men. So that also could be the reason. So it's the lying, it's the safety, it's even the solidarity. Look, you as a man must know that when you're in just male company, there is a different sort of level of ease maybe in your conversation. It's probably, even if you're all brand new men, as in you don't know each other before that day, it's just such a different vibe than if you just plop a woman in it. And it's the same for women, I mean, unless you're in one of those friendship groups where all those women do is talk about their husbands, like most of the time it just feels different. A space feels different when there's the opposite sex in it. So it's all of it really. And then there's the children element, and there's robbing a child of their adult sex life, basically. I mean, most adults I know who've ever been in a relationship, or even, albeit like for 6 hours, most adults I know quite like sex. It's quite a nice part of life. And to think that you would change a child's body at 12 years old, which meant they would never experience it, is just gross. It's just so abusive. I can't quite believe we do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's sickening, as we said earlier. It's absolutely rotten to the core, the fact that children go through that. I mean, who knows themselves at even 25? You don't really even know yourself, do you? I mean, and let alone 6. I mean, I've heard stories of people wanting to transition at the age of 6. I mean, I mean, we spoke about it before. I mean, I don't know how it's allowed, but I think you made the point about it's a big industry now. It's a big money-making industry. And I also think that it's about growing a political base as well. So the LGBTQ, bring on as many people as possible. This is like a powerful political base now, isn't it? So why would they want to stop that from growing? I think that has a lot to play, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been such a clever trick, right? Because what they did is they attacked themselves linguistically to so many civil rights movements and then we're in this sort of identity politics era, which doesn't make any sense to me. It does on a broad level, looking at a group and thinking, actually, that particular group does have this particular issue. That is really something that we should look at. That's worthwhile. Saying that individual is part of that group and therefore we can make 100 assumptions about them is not very useful to anybody. I think it's pretty damn racist, or whatever, phobic, or whatever else you might attribute. I listened to a discussion the other day with gay black men who just said they had the worst time coming out as a conservative
Yeah, exactly.
in America. And so all their gay friends had like dropped them like stones. That was quite interesting. But what they did, and there's a bit of me that doesn't want to talk about this because it feels like a conspiracy, right? But in every country that speaks English, so America, Australia, Canada, UK, Ireland, what they did is they sort of captured institutions and organizations and systems. They captured them with this transphobic stuff before any of us knew it was going to be an issue, before there was this explosion of the population that suddenly decided they were trans. It's so bad in schools, spread by social media, that my daughter caught up with an old school friend who said that she gets teased by her friendship group of all girls for being straight and cis, whereas these girls are calling themselves queer because they might have fancied a boy who went out with another boy, so they're now queer. And these are like 13, 14 years old. And this cis stuff, and it's becoming currency with kids about who's cool, so it's really not cool to be straight. In fact, you can just be accused of being transphobic for calling yourself straight, not even super straight.
Oh my
So
God.
it's mad.
Yeah, they're trying to cede the linguistic territory because that's the prerequisite towards political territory, I think. But you have to start off with the linguistics, I think, first, because as soon as you start to say you're not straight, you're hetero, it's a heteronormative, so it's like cisgendered. They're moving it from the natural to the normal, and then when you move it when you strip it from the natural, the biological paradigm, and into the normal, you now move it into the social construction, the socially constructed world, and then you can start looking at that through the lens of hierarchy. So then they can say, well, you know, cis, you have all the chips, you know, and us down here, we have more of a victim status.
Yeah.
So therefore we need to tip the scales. We need to flip that around. But they had to strip it away from the biological to do that. And I think that's the trick. And it starts off with the linguistics. So whenever someone says cis to me, I'm like, no, I'm not cis. I'm straight. It's always been straight. It's you that's changed that language. You if you want to use that, fine. Don't force me to use that.
There's some very, very rich men who now call themselves women who are driving a lot of this. There's a lot of like hidden, I can't remember the group, but let's say it was called the Sailor Group or the Lighthouse Group. And it's loads of people who believe in, it's kind of like social engineering. So they will back with substantial amounts of money. They will sort of siphon it into certain campaigns. It's quite scary. But these powerful men in America who are basically autogynephiles, they fund a lot of this stuff, and they also insert themselves. So I think somebody said, the Times columnist Matthew Paris, a gay man, they talked about how they would make society more accepting of homosexuality, which obviously I'm sure we both think is a good thing. But they did it in this sort of very methodical infiltrate into certain groups. And then unfortunately, that sort of thing works well, and it's good, because if I'm an immigrant population, for example, then I do want one of my countrymen in a position of power at a council. Otherwise, no one's ever going to hear anything we ever say. So I do agree that that's a great thing. But then you also had the paedophile information exchange, using that sort of method to get into the police and the judiciary, so that when their mates were accused of it, there was somebody that could just make sure that nothing ever happened to those people. And now you've got it with trans lobby groups, and politicians are so easily captured. It's just, I mean, conviction politician, right? We used to say that. And I always thought that was a terrible thing because it meant the rest of them didn't have any conviction, which I think was probably true. So Anne Widdecombe, I would say, Tony Benn, those sort of people that really did stand by their principles. Well, those days are gone.
They've long gone. And isn't that part of your new campaign to stop the trans lobbying within schools? I think that was, yeah.
Yeah, I'm doing research at the moment into chronic mental health wards for women, the NHS and police. And what we want to prove, and what we already know, is nobody actually cares. So the police, if you go to work as a copper and you tell them you're a woman, then you are allowed to operate as a woman in the police force. And it's up to the duty sergeant whether or not that means you get to intimately search female suspects. So it's up to the individual. There's no clear-cut rule to protect the woman in that situation. If you work at the NHS, so here's a story for you. There was a guy, can't remember his name, and I'm quite happy not to remember his name. He took over as head nurse on a chronic mental health ward. So that will mean women with psychosis, suffering trauma, all that sort of stuff. And what he did on his first day as the chief nurse on the ward, head nurse, is he moved his office down to where those women sleep. And so these women, often they would have suffered sexual trauma, child sex abuse, and so on. And what happens with severely mentally ill people is they're quite inappropriate in their behavior, both men and women in their sort of sexual behavior. And he's on that ward as a head nurse because nobody cares. So we're doing this research to just show people that, look, this is how far it's gone. This is what we're allowing.
And also, I remember you actually put a request out for men to show the craziness by suggesting, like, go into a queue, like for women's, changing room.
I got in trouble for that.
I know. I was actually thinking I might do that actually, but then I watched it. Obviously now it's even harder because it's nowhere open. But I mean, what was the point with that? Were you trying to make? And also, you also said something about like taking guns in as well.
Well, I didn't say that. This is the funny thing.
Okay.
So what I said is that what I visualized, right, is the sort of man in America who thinks he's a great protector of his family and women. And then anyway, so this particular man, next time he goes to his school parents' evening, what he was to do is ask to go and use the loo and then head for the women's toilets. And not actually go in and intimidate women or whatever, but just make a point of being a blokey McBloke and walking in or walking towards a women's toilet. And then the teacher says, you can't go in there, that's for women. And him saying, I identify as a woman. And the teacher saying, no, you don't. And him saying, but you let boys in my daughter's changing room. You know, it's that. I think we've got to the point where we've all, in America, they've lost everything. They have they have men in women's shelters, they've got rapists in women's prisons, which we do over here, but in America it is so much worse because they don't really have the checks and balances we do here, and ours are pretty shoddy, but at least we kind of pretend to have them.
I mean, yeah, there was that. I mean, it is an extreme case, but it does happen where you have trans men raping women in prisons, and I'm sure it happens in toilets and stuff like that. I mean, they are extreme cases, aren't they? I mean, this is a question from one of my friends here in the studio just before I came on. I have to ask this, but I mean, if they were genuine in their transition, let's say, in their mind, and they had the sex op, so they don't have balls, they don't have a penis, so I guess you could say that level of safety has gone in terms of rape. Would you be more okay of them using the toilet, or as okay, or how would you see it?
I just kind of feel that women would still read that person as male. And then that kind of says that, are we then going to do genital checks in toilets? I mean, maybe the answer to these men feeling unsafe in men's toilets are for men not to be unsafe. I mean, that's touted all the time, that by these men, the other men are really unsafe, so they can't go in their toilets. But when women say they don't feel safe with these men in their toilets, we're not listened to. I sort of feel sex is a good divider. It's worked for a really long time for humans. So I think it would be really accepting if those men were still accepted as men. The idea that they can legally change their sex to be women just strikes me as a very intolerant society, that we need to have these legal markers, and B, it's ruined everything. Once you call someone a trans woman, why can't they be she? Why can't they go in a women's toilet? Why can't something with woman in the title? Why can't that have all access to all women's spaces like all other women? And that's how it's frequently talked about. Whereas if we said that's a man, and we didn't use any of these kind of blurring words like trans woman, which is just a silly term, we wouldn't be in any of this mess.
I was going to say, with that in mind, do you not also think that, let's say they'd had the sex change up, but they were XY chromosomes, so they are biologically male, but then they went into a male toilet, would they not be endangering themselves to rape?
Well, then maybe men should not attack people. That would be the...
Yeah, but you can't, that's part of the human condition. You can't say that, because I mean, that's like saying, I wish people wouldn't murder. I mean, you can't stop it. You can't talk about a whole group.
Well, because I don't see them as women, I don't see the risk. There was a large study of trans inmates in, I always say California, I think it's the California prisons. And actually a lot of those transsexuals or people that call them trans, they wanted to remain in men's prisons because a lot of them were homosexual, and they quite enjoyed the attention of being seen as a woman in a really male, hypersexual environment. And those that didn't, they wanted to go to women's prisons, but they weren't moved. However, the propensity for them and the risk at them committing crime, especially sex crimes, did not change when they transitioned. So I don't think we can say just because, I don't think it's just testosterone that makes somebody commit crime, or just their testicles that make them commit crime. It's lots of things, and it's nothing, and it's everything. And so I don't think we can just isolate that one aspect of somebody's body or function and say that they won't commit crimes anymore. So no, I don't. I just don't want them in my space. It's not a woman's problem to facilitate vulnerable men. If you think about it, I can't speak this morning. You've got the most vulnerable men in society will be men with probably autism. That's the most vulnerable children in school. They are the most likely to be picked on, the most likely to be ignored, the most likely to be ostracized, the most likely to have physical assaults at school. There's no campaign for them. There's no campaign to allow autistic men who are probably bullied and pushed around in public spaces to have them come into women's toilets. So I don't really see why we have to see a trans woman as a more vulnerable population of men than men that are genuinely vulnerable. Likewise, effeminate and weaker men in prison are probably just at risk of violence and sexual violence in men's prisons as a man who identifies as trans.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I totally agree with that, actually. Yeah, I was going to just, I'd want another question on the toilets. Let me just,
okay, I'm gonna take
because it is, I mean, that's what a lot of it just comes down to. I mean, the invasion of female spaces. And I totally agree with you. I think that there has to be some kind of, that we have these markers for a reason, and it's a societal standard that we have. And if you start chipping away at them, for me, it's a slippery slope, and it's like, where do you stop? And I can almost see now things like paedophilia being slowly normalized to the point where I can almost see it being added to the LGBTQ rainbow flag, if you know what I mean, under the guise of pedosexual. You've actually had TED Talks talking about that. So this isn't buried. This isn't hidden.
It's not their fault. It's not their fault.
Yeah, I know it's not their fault that they like children, and who are we to stop them? But I can actually see that's the inevitable end game for a lot of this, is children getting hurt from this. And I actually think that this is what really annoys me about the whole LGBTQ activism, is that they actually care more for a stray cat than they do for children, I think, in a lot of cases. And
Children are quite useful to them.
sorry.
Children are quite useful because if you say a child is trans, then not all men who identify as trans are autogynephiles, are they?
Hang on. So what can we just? Does that mean like a fetish for to be we used to call that transvestite fetishism? Is that kind of what it means?
Yeah. So it's the embodiment of basically a vagina and wanting to be it so much. I've talked to parents who talk about their sons wanted to be trans women because they watched a lot of lesbian porn. I mean, I think that's another reason why this is coming into consciousness, because really violent, aggressive, kind of fringe porn that probably was never illegal when I was younger is now freely available online. And it's got to corrupt you, right? When my kids were little, they watched a really horrible film called Where the Wild Things Are. And it's like a Swedish or Danish dark book. And one of the characters loses an arm. And it's not like a British Disney or a British or Disney sort of, it's a terrible, terrible event in this film. And it screwed up my kids for about, I don't know, 4 years. And then when they got to teenagers, I was like, well, that's what porn does. It will change the way you feel about stuff. So just be very mindful that it can have whatever you think it gives you. It can very much take that bit of everything away from you as well. So, we really sort of talked about the sort of porn that they were going to be able to freely get as easily as possible. And I think that we don't have enough restrictions on porn, which is why transsexual porn is quite a well-watched category. Incest is top.
Oh,
and then
really? What?
On Pornhub.
No.
And there's a lot of racist porn as well. So there's a lot of sort of enslavement.
But they're not. It's not actually really incest though. It's like they're pretending to. It's like daddy loves, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I know, but don't you think if that's the title of the thing and that's what you're buying into as a narrative, then it doesn't really matter if it's real, does it?
Well, I think it does a little bit because it's staged, isn't it? It's like fantasy. It's like the same thing as when they have it's like role play. It's role playing. I don't think, but I know what you mean. It's not healthy at all in any way, but it's not actual. No. It's a little bit different to if an actual biological father had sex with his.
Oh, I agree with you. Of
That's
course,
incest. Yeah. Let's get that out there right now.
For all your viewers, it's still gross. Let me just say,
it's still gross. It's still gross. Yeah.
Still one of the most cited sources of divorce pornography.
Yeah, I mean, we had Judith Reisman on. I don't know if you know who she is, but she's in her 80s and she wrote a book about the origins of porn and how it came from Alfred Kinsey's sex research in the 30s, and then it led on to John Money, and John Money had the Reimer twins who he transitioned one of those kids without them knowing, and then they both committed suicide. So that all kind of goes back to Alfred Kinsey, but also led to the whole porn industry. And so that's, and how it's all a kind of a political aim, and also has very, very evil undertones to the whole thing.
Didn't Hefner have something to do with Kinsey as well?
Yeah, he did. So Kinsey provided he was like the pamphleteer for Kinsey's sex research. And so he was the one that started the ball rolling with all that stuff. And an
empowering trip though for women.
It was what?
Such an empowering trip to go and live in the bunny house or whatever it was called.
I know. He was a dirtbag as well. And actually, she won a court case in Holland because they took the case to Holland because they knew it was the most liberal country in the world. And she was saying that in Playboy there was paedophilic. There were cartoons that are actually promoting champion paedophilic sort of behaviour. She won the court case in the end, but they tried to take it all the way to the Netherlands because they thought that might be one place that, they throw the case out, but she won that case. What else I was going to say? I was going to say also, because this is, this is men improvement as well. So we do talk from the male side. Do you not also think that they're trying to scrub out masculinity and maleness as well? Because if you notice, there's lots of talks of everything's toxic masculinity these days. No toxic femininity, but maleness is evil. It's wrong. you know, so as men, we carry the shame and blame of men long dead or distant. And so I can see men are carrying this as they're walking around. They're feeling as though they're collectively, you know, holding that burden and of knowing that they are the rapists, they are the murderers, they're the bad. Do you not think that there's a sort of, you know, and also with men, you know, when have you seen where they spell out the word woman and they take out they put a cross through the, I mean, it's like, I feel as though men are being scrubbed out. I mean, is there a little bit of both there, or do you think can you see it from the male side as well?
Well, I can, because I have sons about to leave home, and so and they're nice, right? I mean, I know I'd listened to somebody today who said, you don't know what your sons are like outside the house, and I think, well, yeah, I just hope I've done enough by the time they leave, right? But when it comes to my sons, I worry about them getting drunk and falling in a river, because that's like my experience of that's what happens to boys. They do silly things and they end up dead. You know, whether it's drinking too much, running across the road because your mates are on the other side, dying in car accidents. And for my daughter, I probably do worry about her walking home or having a horrible boyfriend, right? And whether or not those things bear out statistically as the things that I should worry about is a completely other issue. But I'm married to a really decent blokey muck bloke. I've used that too many. I've never used that expression before, and I've said it about 7 times. But he's the guy that goes downstairs. If his toxic masculinity and the fact that he's massively built, if there's a loud bang in the middle of the night, he's going down the stairs. If there's something heavy that needs bringing in from the car, he's bringing it in. He doesn't fix anything. I do that. I'm good at fixing stuff. I'm good at fixing our car, although not since they got proper computer type stuff. But when we were younger, I could sort of fix an engine, and he's a great chef. But there's this thing about toxic masculinity when people talk about it, which I just think isn't that just being a bloke? Like, do we have to call it toxic?
Yeah, exactly.
Is it toxic, for example, that when I was on that train, there's a guy in front of me who's being really irritating, and I'm doing all those little kind of calculations. How far can I push the, okay, thank you, you can leave me alone now. But then I've got, are those 3 men who are also going, are you all right? At the other end of the carriage, are they toxic? They're trying to interfere and making sure that doing white knighting or whatever we have to call it, making sure that I'm all right. Is that toxic? Is the builder who worked on my parents' house toxic for intervening when a man was beating up a woman in the street and he got stabbed? Was that toxic masculinity? You know, you can't have, I quite like the idea of a man as a protector of the family, as long as that doesn't mean that he then is the person that decides everything. Why can't we? What's wrong with that? It's worked for a really long time. And I mean, like someone says, people often say to me, you're really lucky to be in a great marriage. I'm like, well, you know, he's really lucky. We're both really lucky we found each other. I'm quite feisty. He can put up with that. So, but yes, I do. I think that there is this thing where all of a sudden men are supposed to just be, I don't even know what they're supposed to be. What they're supposed to be, women with penises. I have no idea. It's
going that way. I think it's going that way, to be honest with you. I think that women are becoming more masculine and men are becoming more feminized. I think it's almost creating like a homogenous society where it's almost genderless. I think it's the no gender agenda that I see playing out at the moment.
That's the end of days, isn't it? That's the end of civilization. That's when we really mess around with these roles, and then we don't have any roles and everybody becomes some sort of homogenous group. That is the end of civilization.
Yeah,
because we all need, doesn't mean that my sons aren't allowed to cry, although they
exactly
don't.
Yeah,
not my daughter, to be fair. In fact, my daughter cries less than anyone. She's really hard. It doesn't mean that my husband's not allowed to worry about stuff. It doesn't mean that I'm not allowed to make decisions. It doesn't mean we're not allowed to be human. It just means that I recognize that when he's 6 foot and massively built and I'm 5'1", there are definite differences between the pair of us. I carried our children and fed them. He can't do that. There's a reason that that women have a certain empathy and recognize empathy amongst each other, and that's because otherwise our babies would die.
Yeah. So we're embracing femalism is a term that you like, and
Do.
maleism. So let's
Well,
embrace the binary, shall we?
I've started this thing called feminism because I think feminism no longer stands for women's rights. It's been co-opted. It's been parasitically invaded by men who support the prostitution industry, who are pimps and johns, and men who call themselves women. And then other men who just really hate women, who want to pretend that they support men who think they're women. And so it's been massively co-opted and it's been commercialized. There's a comedian called Jade Adams who does this routine about Beyonce and how Beyonce is basically bent over a stool in a high-cut basque in front of the word feminism. And then Jay-Z comes behind fully dressed and basically grinds into the back of her. And she's standing in front of feminism. And you're like, is it though? Is that what we're fought for? I don't think so. But I do think also feminism has become something where women get to an obstacle and just whine about it and get nothing done. And I'd really like to see women sort of proceeding on their own terms, not asking permission. And, you know, if you want to stay home with your kids, stay home. I mean, how do we square the circle where we're not allowed to rely on men? So according to feminism, you're not allowed to rely on a man, not even your husband. You have to have your own money. But then it's okay to pay a woman not very good wages to raise your children while you go out and earn not very good wages. I mean, it's just all the political parties campaigned on the idea of women go back to work when their baby's about 6 months full time. Why didn't we campaign for the fact that actually women do a really good job being mothers? We're better mothers than fathers and mothers. And so can't we do that for the first year at least of our children's lives and organize society in a way that women can do that? And if I choose to do that while my husband earns good money, then I should be able to do that. And his toxic masculinity and his hard work can just pay all the bills.
Exactly. What's wrong with that? I mean, I don't see it as opposite sex. It should be complementary sex. That's what it should be. And we should embrace that. I don't see what the problem is with that. Because the talk about equality, I mean, it's going to get to the point where a pregnant woman's going to come on a bus and no man's going to stand up because they're like, well, you know, I wouldn't get up if it was a man. So I'm not going to get up for this woman. You know, if they want equality, then I'm not going to give my seat up for her. I mean, so, you know, we have to use a little bit of common sense with this, I think. But yeah, I'm all for what you're championing there, definitely. We've done an hour there, so thank you, Posie. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Anything you'd like to say, especially to our predominantly male audience? Is there any final thoughts, final things you'd like to say? Anything that we haven't said already, or do you think we've got most of it in?
Well, I think I'd just like to reiterate that I have every faith in men generally. But what I would like men to start doing is I'd like you to be the people that go in and talk to your children's schools about what they're learning in sex ed. I'd like you to really understand what it is that they're teaching your sons and daughters, that they're talking to your kids at primary school about masturbation. They're blurring the lines between adults and children. And I think all dads should be getting a little bit more involved in the sort of minutiae of school and parent relationships, because you are the biggest advocates for your children. Nobody else is looking after them. Nobody cares that your elderly mother goes in a hospital ward and is next to a bloke who calls himself a woman. No one cares about those things. And if you can start being an advocate for the women in your lives about that sort of stuff, and your kids, I mean, no man wants their kids to be learning that, you know, in Germany, for example, they have to design their best ever brothel when they're 14 in sex ed. That's one of the
design their best brothel.
Their best brothel. What would be their dream? In sex ed in Germany. But in the UK, we're not very far away. They talk about pornography in schools. They don't talk about the harm of pornography. You really have a duty to talk to your sons and daughters about really what happens with porn and what can happen to your life, sort of your sex life, if you watch too much of it, how unreal it is, and have really open conversations. But do have a look at the curriculum of what your kids are being taught in schools, and don't take no for an answer when you ask to see exactly what they're being taught. I'll give you an example, just very briefly. My 11-year-old came home and they were talking about hygiene. So it was a hygiene PSHE thing. And she said, oh, it was awful, Mum. There was a woman in a bra and a man topless sat in bed. And one of the slides was about having a wash after sex. She was 11.
Yeah.
So I went into school. Yeah, I did. So I went into school and I talked to the teacher. Also teach your sons, specifically your sons, about how they talk to girls. So by the time my daughter was 12, she'd been asked if my husband urinated in her mouth. All different, like really highly sexualized stuff. And if you've got nice boys, you need to try and help them navigate kind of not being the odd one out who then gets picked on for not saying this sort of thing, but also doesn't say them. So it's really difficult for boys now, because you do have boys at 11, 12, 13 who watch copious amounts of porn. And my son had to dump his whole friendship group because they were all watching it when he was about 14 and he didn't want to. You know, that's what he says. Maybe he was, but they were all,
yes.
you know, I have no idea really, but he did say, it got to the point where one of them asked his younger sister, who was 11 at the time, does your brother rape you? So these sorts of conversations, these are nice kids in a nice school, but these conversations are going on, and we really do have a duty to get our, you know, our faces right into our children's conversations and watch what they do on social media. Don't let your little kids be on WhatsApp groups and be ostracized and all that stuff. Just
really
know what
keep
they're
an
watching.
eye.
Just know what they're doing. Like, you wouldn't let them go down the road and talk to any bloke at the end of the street, would you? So, and that's literally what they can be doing online. So I just, for me, when I was thinking about nurturing my boys and how they were going to manage secondary school, it's not like your daughter where you're worried about what's going to be said to her and how horrible girls are going to be and how she's going to get ostracized or called fat or called too thin, or she develops too early or develops too late. That's the sort of thing you worry about with girls, the friendship and the ostracizing, because girls can be monstrous and evil when it comes to that. But with boys, the macho sort of culture, which is so much worse than when I was at school, I think you've really got to have this open dialogue with your sons so they can come home and say what other boys are saying and how they navigate it, because you don't want them to have no friends because they sort of screw their nose up at everything. But you also don't want them watching violent porn at 12.
I mean, don't you think it's slightly difficult when a lot of the hot girls at school that you fancy are going with the bad boys? I mean, what's the entrainment there? What do these guys learn from that? In the fact that if they're just nice to women, that they can't get anywhere, but then these bad boy assholes are getting the hot girls. So then they learn from that and they pick up the little things they do. And so it's culturally
Well, I can tell you what
through
I did with that.
osmosis. What do you do?
Well, so my son was sort of talking about this, and I just said, I want you to really think about, these are the best days these boys will ever have. That's it. When school's over, they go nowhere. These are the best days they ever have. Their life goes downhill from the day they leave school. Whereas yours is just going to get better and better and better, because you've got the training ground of being a decent bloke. And actually, when you're 25 and you've got a really gorgeous, successful girlfriend and you're gorgeous and successful yourself, and people accept and appreciate kindness and decentness, because that's what the nice girls, the really nice girls, look for, then it all pays off. Because, you know, and for the girls that are going for those bad guys, that's those, we've all seen the really beautiful, pretty, like, girl, popular girl at school who was, and then we see her years later not doing so well.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But you do have the white knights, and they don't get very far either, I would say. Like the very, you know, the new romantic types, the kind of the very feminized guys that think that all they have to do is turn up on a date with a bunch of roses. We all know how that goes down, unless you're watching these like PG movies where like they somehow win the girl over at the end. But that's just so unrealistic. This just doesn't happen. So I think we should still embrace our leadership qualities, the ability to be decisive and have a little bit of naughtiness in us, a bit of cheekiness within reason. You know, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And to also just own your balls and own your sexuality, because that also is part of being male as well. You know, I think
the most attractive person is self-assured, right? Not arrogant, not cocky, but just knows who they are and is comfortable in their own skin, which is bloody difficult if you're a teenager. Who can do that? But also, big lesson to all children: don't write anything down or text anything you don't want anybody else to see.
Oh, really?
Don't send any images of yourself. Just don't do it. Don't ever do it. I've got a friend whose nephew did it. A girl sent him a picture. He forwarded it on. He basically then got bullied out of the school because he was seen as a predator. So don't do it, boys. Nobody and never do it anyway. If you're going to do something terrible, say it. And then you can always deny it.
Yeah. Certainly don't put it on Twitter, because we know what might happen from that. Okay.
Too right. Yeah. Don't put anything on Twitter ever.
Don't go onto that cesspit. All right, Posie, thank you so much for that.
Welcome. It was a joy.
It was an absolute joy for us as well. And that's it, everyone. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, if you want to see us bring on similar types of powerful voices like Posie Parker here, please smash that like button, please subscribe, and I will see you in the next episode. Cheers.